Welcome to another episode of the CPG Guys podcast. Our hosts, Sri Rajgopalan, Peter V.S. Bond, and Brian Gildenberg explore how brands and retailers engage consumers in an increasingly digitally driven world. And now, here are the CPG Guys.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the CPG Guys podcast. I'm Brian Gildenberg, the founder and CEO of Confluencer Commerce, the managing director of North America Retail Cities, and the host of both the Gildenberg OmniComment LinkedIn video series and the CPG Guys Fast Forward podcast. Today, here on the CPG Guys, though, we'll be joined by a very special guest in just a minute. But before that, I just want to remind everyone to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform. And if you use Apple or Spotify, please give us a rating, whose number and ranking should rhyme with jive bars. Jive bars. Just think jive bars when you log in. And then think about what rhymes with that. But please do give us a rating, especially a good one. It really does help feed the algorithm and makes our podcast more findable for people who are looking to become informed on the topics which we cover. We want to express how honored we are to be rated the number one CPG podcast for 2 years running, according to FeedSpot, the leading podcast ranking authority. Well, of course, they're the leading authority. They ranked us number one. And we are very pleased to have join us in the top 30, our sister podcast, the CPG Scoop, the CPG Guys Fast Forward, which is the number 2 marketing podcast in Trinidad, and the FMCG Guys, in that I have literally 2 friends in Trinidad who listen to it. And we're happy to be the formal sponsors of Next Up, whose mission is to advance all women in business and promote the cause of gender equality in the workplace. To learn more about Next Up, simply click on the hyperlink in the digital liner notes of this episode, where you'll also find links to our podcast site and the sites of our sister cast. You'll also find links to one of the other CPG guys, of course, Sri, his daughters Ray and Laura, as they go on their career journeys in the music industry, and just good stuff to follow along. Of course, on the CPG Guys today, not sadly joined either by Sri, CPG Guy number 1 or 2, and Peter Bond, CPG Guy number 1 or 2, both sadly unavailable for today. So I can make fun of the Yankees and Dodgers as much as I've got a microphone and I'm going to use it. No, we're going to use it today to have an actual productive conversation. So let's get to our very special guest for that. She's been waiting patiently. Our guest today is the SVP of Go-to-Market at LiveRamp, Daniella Harkins. Please, everybody applaud at home and join me for welcoming Daniella. Daniella, how are you doing today?
Hi. Well, thank you so much. I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing outstanding. And we are thrilled to have you be part of our podcasting network today. So this should be a fun conversation.
Yeah, it's going to be great. I'm equally thrilled. Thank you.
Excellent. So, this is our second episode brought to you by LiveRamp. And we alluded to the topic we're going to tackle today a little bit in the opening conversation, because it was literally, we recorded that conversation the day after this happened, which is your acquisition of Habu. And we're going to use that as a platform to talk about clean rooms and all the wonderful things that clean rooms can do. As I am often fond of explaining, it took this industry to teach me that clean room was a noun and not a command to a teenager. So I feel good about that. But look, I think right now, but what would be great, Danielle, is you just give us a quick overview of both LiveRamp and your role there for the audience. I think that would be a great way to start.
Yeah, absolutely. So first off, Brian, thank you again so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. I am the SVP of Product Go-to-Market at LiveRamp, which really means that I sit in between a lot of different functions. So I sit between marketing, I sit between commercial, and I sit between product. And my role and my team's goal is really to streamline how we bring customer solutions to market and do it in a way that it's simpler, more understandable. I mean, the reality is that the ecosystem is complex enough. And I think a lot of our clients and marketers and publishing partners have to deal with a lot in terms of complexity, and LiveRamp doesn't need to make that any more difficult. So that's what I do at LiveRamp, and really sit in the middle of a lot of different things, but highly focused on how we can bring our products and solutions to customers and really drive value with our customers, and how to do that in a very clear and succinct way.
Fantastic. So and we'll get into obviously a little bit more what LiveRamp does in some of these specific areas as we get into our questions. But of course, in the digital liner notes of this episode, we're going to include links to your LinkedIn profile, LiveRamp's LinkedIn page, and your corporate website for our listeners to access while we go on with our conversation for those people that want to do a deeper dive into the world of Daniella or the world of LiveRamp. And why don't we just take a second here, then we'll dive right into the questions. Or if you want to start with kind of the news that's going to predicate this for people that haven't heard yet, you could do that, or we could start with the questions.
Yeah, I think that we're all alluding to the news that LiveRamp acquired Habu, which is a clean room software company. And it's incredibly exciting for us because I do believe it unlocks a lot of opportunity for our customers, but also really pushes forward the industry in terms of what clean rooms can do and how to just make them more interoperable and make them more seamless in our clients' world, because it's oftentimes really difficult to think about how do I add new technology into an already, I talked about the complex ecosystem already, but how do I add new technology, new partnerships, all of that in a world that's already complex and changing on a regular basis. And so with this acquisition, there was just, we aligned on what our joint vision was, and there was complete agreement and alignment when we went through the diligence process. We've known the Habu guys for a long time. We've partnered with them in a lot of different ways, but it's incredibly exciting because it's exciting for us. But what gets me more excited is what this really can unlock for our customers and really how we can push the idea of data collaboration powered by clean room technology, how this can now start to unlock and really accelerate new opportunities in the marketplace.
That's great. And since Habu was also on the podcast, I feel this is like, when two good friends of yours, get married. It's like,
they come together, right? We are now one.
we're looking forward to the wedding. So, but before we get into this, let's talk a little about you and your personal journey. I mean, how did you get wherever you started from to go-to-market leader and data identity expert and all the other things that you would become over the years? Talk a little about your journey along the way here.
Yeah, absolutely. So full transparency, I was a French literature major in college. So you can kind of see.
Sweet. History of philosophy here. So really no two better people to be talking hardcore data matching than
I mean, if there's not a direct correlation between French literature, philosophy, and data collaboration identity, I don't know if there is. But, the reality is I kind of fell into it. I probably am like a lot of other people that have been around for a while that I fell into it because after grad school, I went to work for an email agency and that was acquired by Acxiom. And so I grew from email, which was inherently data-driven, into much more like database marketing, right? I feel a little bit old when I say this, but like into core database marketing, doing a lot of stuff with direct mail. Again, strongly data-driven. And then I started to move into kind of the digital ecosystem and what we could do. And it's funny, back in the day, we used to call some of the targeting we were doing, the data-driven targeting, collaborative targeting. And I find it so interesting because here we are talking about what data collaboration can do powered by clean rooms. And so, I just really wanted to take all of those kind of strategies and philosophies and data-driven capabilities, figure out how to apply them to the digital ecosystem. And so that's the reality. For about the past 20 years, I've been working at the intersection, I say this all the time, of data, tech, and marketing. A lot of times I'll say data, tech, and creative. And it just gets me really excited because now, we've been talking about, and I don't know if you feel this way, Brian, but, some of the narratives haven't changed for a long time in terms of the desire of this, marketing holy grail. What I get really excited about now is the technology that's available to us that's really going to be able to supercharge it and apply it to kind of the broader enterprise that exists. So that's a little bit about me. I would say, again, fell into this, but fell in love with what data can do and how to apply it, and have really kind of taken steps to figure out how to apply that across the broader ecosystem.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I love this idea of collaborative targeting, because I think it'll frame up the conversation about Habu more specifically in a minute. Yeah, my observation is I think right now the world is at a place where people have been talking about personalization for years, right? And it's like, we need to get to one-to-one commerce. I'm like, one-to-one commerce isn't business. One-to-one commerce is my kid's lemonade stand. I mean, that's one-to-one commerce, unless you've got some sort of infrastructure behind that allows that to scale to a point where one human isn't trying to sell things to one other human, because then that just doesn't work, right? So the whole process has to get more automated, and the automation process, the ability to bring data sets together to fuel that process is just so important.
It is.
And I guess that'll get us right into the sort of the opening salvo here around, look, yell about Habu for a bunch of reasons, but what do you think some of the enhanced capabilities now of the marketing ecosystem gets to leverage as a result of this?
Yeah.
So in essence, this lets you collaborate more easily with another data partner wherever your data lives, right?
It does. It does. It's interesting. I say right away, the first thing I oftentimes say is ease in speed to value, because this idea of being more collaborative in the market, I think everybody wants to do it, but it's not easy.
No.
It is, technology business rules and increased regulation. There's all of these things that are impacting our ability to collaborate. And what I'm really proud of is just, moving forward with this acquisition is this is really a step forward and taking some of the more complexity and making it a little bit easier, as well as really increasing the speed to value. But before I kind of jump into some of it, I think the reality is when we sat down and did our due diligence and kind of aligned on what our core vision was, there's a couple of things that were kind of non-negotiables, I would say, for both of us, but also very much in line as we looked at our separate visions, what was important. And they were, one, clean rooms are critical technology and data collaboration to really unlock enterprise value. We have to look at it from that standpoint. We're probably going to talk a little bit about signal loss, I suspect, Brian, but the industry is changing dramatically. I always get the question. That's why I was throwing it out there.
Well, and it may or may not be my next question. So
yeah. The industry is changing. There's increased regulation. There's so much movement. But the reality is having a privacy enhanced clean room strategy core capability really does unlock new enterprise capabilities for data collaboration. The other thing, we got to reduce the lift around data movement. And lastly, we got to be interoperable across clouds, across ecosystem partners, across identity, across all of that. And so that's how we kind of came together and said, hey, we actually all agree that these are core to our vision and our strategy. But then when you look at specifically when I talk to customers and when I talk to our internal teams about what's additive to what we now have with Habu, I break it down super simple. One is walled garden insights, being able to get to supercharge your media, but also to be able to get more enhanced insights around media across Meta, Facebook, across Google, and across Amazon from a single UI. That is a core new functionality that Habu brings to LiveRamp. The other thing is, I mentioned this interoperability across all clouds.
Can we pause there for a second? Because I think that's, y'all do a lot, but that's a pretty big one, right? So the idea is that you've now got a clean room architecture that allows you to take things out of each of these walled gardens, temporarily put it in a new unwalled or sort of privacy controlled garden, like an atrium. And you get what you need out of it. And then all of that data obviously then goes back to the walled gardens where it lives. But it can be extracted temporarily, used and matched for a specific purpose, and then put back where it belongs so that nobody's giving data away. Just for people listening to this that are less familiar with clean rooms than, say, you are, and even me, even though.
Yeah, I think, Brian, that's a good way. The only thing that I would change about that is that we're not necessarily moving the data or extracting the data. We're actually enabling data to be tied together in an environment that's privacy safe and not needing us to pick data up and kind of, introduce risk for any of the businesses around it. But at the end of the day, what you're saying is right in that what it's unlocking or what it's making available to our customers. And that's really access to looking at walled garden media with you having control, right? Looking at walled garden exposure data, looking at it with your conversion data, with first party conversion data, and being able to make decisions based off of that. And again, having that kind of single UI to be able to look at that, I think is incredibly valuable. And we see it, just for context, our clients, we've started talking to clients about this and the excitement about being able to do this, but then be able to then say, hey, I want insights to the walled gardens, but hey, I'm working with my television partners and I'm working with other premium publishers. How do I bring a lot of consistency to my measurement across all of these partnerships?
Right.
Right. And that's where it gets really exciting.
Well, yeah. And I think too, that's, I got to imagine that at some point, that's one of the major use cases in the retail media world where you've got
100%.
So many, even if they're not walled gardens, they're gardens that are growing different vegetables or whatever.
100%.
So, and trying to make a salad out of it can be a lot of hard work.
Absolutely. It's so interesting because it unlocks this opportunity to do, right now we do a lot of collaboration, but let's be real about where we are, right? It's a lot of one-to-one collaboration, right? And what this allows us to really start to do is to start to unlock more easily some of the multi-party collaboration, which starts to get really excited when you start talking about retail media networks on-site versus off-site. How can you do things with television partners and CTV? How can you bring that into it? And then how can you unlock or provide new measurement capabilities, kind of full funnel capabilities for your brand partners? And I think starting to look at that from a multi-party standpoint starts to really bring some new opportunities to retail media networks and to brands to be able to partner and enhance what they're doing today.
Right. So, and before you jumped out, you were about to jump out of the walled garden into the world of interoperability. So what do you mean when you say that?
What do I mean around interoperability?
Yeah.
So I think that the other part that you need to do is that every client has a different tech stack, has a different set of partners. And it's really important to LiveRamp that we're able to interact with all of them and go where the data is, regardless of which partners they're working with. And in this case, the interoperability with cloud partners. This is really an accelerant that Habu brought to LiveRamp, which is all of these really strategic cloud partners and cloud data warehouse partners, so that now we can unlock clean room capabilities without needing to move data and basically be able to work with any cloud data warehouse that exists today. So if you're in Azure, great. If you're on GCP, great. It doesn't matter. And it doesn't matter what your partners are on, that we can now facilitate collaboration with mitigating some of the risk associated with data movement, but really becoming interoperable against any cloud partner. Because the reality is, to make this work, Brian, if you are on GCP and your partner is on Amazon, or right, then the reality is it's not always easy to collaborate between those two.
Yes. So, and this makes that easier. And I think that's going to become an increasingly interesting challenge in the retail world, where so many businesses work off of AWS. And for I would describe are understandable reasons, most of the retailers in the world don't want to give Amazon money to power their computers. So I think that interoperability, is going to be absolutely critical. So
I agree.
That sounds good. All right. You had alluded to signal loss. So for anybody that had the 18-minute mark when we mentioned cookie degradation on this, they win a duck comes down and you win a prize. But it's probably now time to start to talk about signal loss. And it's been interesting, obviously, because, you guys work in a data world that's broader than the retail media space, and everybody's freaking out about cookies. But it's like, people have been freaking out about ATT and IDPA and the mobile side for years. And, the amount of clean rooming one would imagine Meta's had to do to bring together data basically to sort of overcome that's not trivial, right? But looking now at the world where we do appear to be going into a cookieless world, which is basically the house I'm in right now because I've eaten them all. So why is this capability even more important than it was before when you're looking at that sort of loss of signal?
Yep. So I love that you're kind of framing it more broadly as well from a signal loss standpoint, because if you add increased regulation and we think about kind of what's happening with third-party data, and let's be real, a lot of marketers are out there also relying on third-party data to know more about their customers. So I think in general, I think we would all agree that signal loss is leaving or making brands and marketers feel a little bit more disintermediated from their consumers. That is obviously spurring all of the conversations around first-party data strategies, because it's hard to drive like consumer insights and reach consumers effectively with signal loss. I think there's a couple of areas where I think that the clean room really does make an impact. First and foremost, the way that I think about it, clean room technology, right, can bring together and is facilitating the ability to basically, I would say, bring the buy and the sell side closer together, right? Whether that's brands and publishers, data owners, and those that want access to data, however we want to think about it. But it's enabling us to bring those two sides together and share data in a more secure way that's really unlocking new opportunities to reach consumers. But on top of it, clean rooms are also providing, because there's built-in privacy and security, it's also, I think, unlocking new opportunities around access to data that we haven't had before, right? So if you think about it in those two ways, one, it's kind of investing in a clean room and having clean room technology is allowing us to kind of preserve some of these existing data connections post-cookie, right? But it's also helping us create new partnerships and create new connections that weren't available before. And I think that's exciting. Yeah.
And I think that's such an important point, too, because there is so much of a scramble, especially in a media world that, as many media executives I've heard stand up in front of an audience and talk about the pace of change, all of media agencies hate change. I mean, the media buyers just can't stand it. They like to be able to buy the same thing over and over again to comp it, to reduce the cost of it. Anything that interrupts the progression towards a lower CPM annoys a media buyer immensely. And discontinuity does that. I think the idea that we're not just trying to replace what we've lost here, but this creates an opportunity for new signal that may, in fact, actually be better or more relevant than the old signal that we were getting, I think is a really, really interesting point.
It's interesting you say that. We just did a Google and LiveRamp just released a case study around cookies and what happens when you move from targeting based off of cookies, but moving towards really kind of leveraging an authenticated ecosystem to be able to do that with a much more consistent identifier. And I think they saw like a 4x improvement in response and in conversion than when they did it off of cookies. So when you talk about, like signal loss is here and clean rooms are going to help make these connections and make new connections. But I think there's also the conversation discourse that needs to happen that says this could also be a lot better for consumers. It's a lot better for us. It's going to be harder. Yeah, the buying process, right? The media buying process is going to look different. Scale is going to look different. The ability to reach someone is inherently going to be more valuable. So there's a lot of things that are going to change. There's still a lot of unknowns, but I think it's exciting that one, it's forcing us to look at, are there new ways and better ways to make these connections with consumers? And I think ultimately tying it back to the clean room, it's these technologies, these privacy safe environments that are allowing us to test some of these new connections.
I like that phrase. The ability to reach someone is inherently going to be more valuable because it's the kind of thing that sounds obvious, but it's actually not how value is created most of the time in the media buy. Most of the time in the media buying world, most of the value that's been created for clients over the last 5 years has been using data and technology as a way to not advertise to people. Like you're basically making your CPM better by reducing the number of irrelevant people you're advertising to. The real monetizable ability in media for the last 5 or 10 years is the ability to not reach someone.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's been the real monetization. The ability to actually reach someone is a really interesting flip for that. I hadn't really thought of that.
Like if we're talking about it more, like scale is going to look like the media ecosystem is going to look different, right?
Well, scale, let me ask you a question there. So if you say scale is going to look different, my hypothesis, which I'm probably wrong about, is one of the real challenges the digital world has presented large advertisers with is that anything that's biddable and auctionable at the granular level disintermediates scale to some degree. Like you can't sit down with a Google algorithm and give a ticket to the Super Bowl so you get a better price. That's not how it works. So when you think about how the nature of scale changes, it seems as though the ability to know what you're doing becomes more important today.
Absolutely.
Rather than just knowing how to optimize cost per click in a pretty transactional way. You actually have to know what you're trying to accomplish, know the best way to accomplish it. Do you think that lends itself better to scaled organizations or less, or do you think smaller organizations have an advantage?
I think it's probably going to, it's a good question. I'm not sure. Truthfully,
I don't know either. I was hoping you had the answer because then we can break some news here.
Right. I know. What I do think, though, one of the things I do want to react to is like this idea of transparency across, like knowing what you're inherently doing and being really focused on it. It'll be interesting to me to see the transparency that exists kind of across this supply chain of media and all of the different steps and everything that happens through the process and what that looks like, right? Once cookies get deprecated, because right. I do think there's going to be a demand for more, like, reaching someone inherently is going to be more valuable. Therefore, it could cost more. Therefore, I need to understand all of the different components of this media buying process so that I can understand how to maximize that. So I think like we're going to see things where publishers and brands, they're going to start coming closer together. And again, thinking about it from a clean room standpoint, because there's value in them coming together and providing some more transparency.
Right. And as a reminder, we are joined today by Daniella Harkins, the SVP of Product Go-to-Market at LiveRamp. So let's build on that a little bit because you were talking about sort of publishers and brands coming together more. But there's a lot of big ideas now that clean room technology enables. Like it enables partnerships to work in a fundamentally different way. What are some of the big multi-branded ideas that you think could be a bigger deal in a clean room environment that y'all can help sort of facilitate?
I mentioned one earlier just around the multi-party, the ability to do multi-party collaboration. Yes. And thinking about retail media networks and brands and partnerships there. I do think being able to tie on-site, off-site, CTV, kind of walled garden measurement, tie that to online and kind of offline sales for full funnel. I do think that while it's not this like huge idea, I do think there's so much opportunity just in what I just said there, right?
Sure, yeah. There's about 7 things you said, so yes.
Yeah, there's a lot there.
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot in there. I mean, and there's a lot of mechanical stuff that needs to go on to make that better. I mean, you just take the connected TV buying landscape, which is something. that we're not allowed to say on a family podcast. But no, my kids listen to this.
You have to put a parental warning on the beginning of it.
Yeah. By the way, for those of you wondering how I get 15-year-olds to listen to this, I don't. I was kidding. My kids, the only podcast one of my kids ever listened to was the one I put my daughter on. But yeah, and I think that this is interesting. And obviously, I mean, if you look at something, you got like the Olympics coming up in 2024, right? I mean, if only NBC Universal were a big user of data and technology, and there are ways to kind of, bring programs together in innovative ways.
What could happen? I mean, so thinking about the Olympics, there's actually a couple of different components of this that I think is exciting. One is think about the co-branding opportunities that exist, right? And we don't have to necessarily just tie it to the Olympics, but I was just talking to somebody the other day and I was like, think about big CPG companies being able to really kind of nail co-branding based on consumer insights, like richer consumer insights, and being able to speak to consumers differently based on what channels they're on, what screens they're on, things like that, which I think is exciting, which really is a possibility, right? I think just the co-marketing opportunities, right? Brands partnering with financial services, brands partnering with delivery services companies, all of these co-brand opportunities. And I got to be honest, Brian, I remember back in the day when I was at Axiom, we used to do a lot of work with our financial services customers and retail customers around co-branding opportunities. And we were like, hey, we're the safe haven, right? We'll process the data. The amount of time that it took to get contracts, the amount of time that it took, we were manually bringing data into kind of the Axiom safe haven. It took time to do this.
Yeah.
Right. It took so much time just to get people to align on what data they could have access to and what it was going to be used for. Right. So this was months of work, to be clear. Co-branding now, right? Being able to collaborate with different brands, you can now get aligned on co-branding in a matter of days.
Right.
Right. And execute on it even faster.
Yeah. And that's massive because I think the opportunities that creates are really interesting. And again, just gravitating back to retail media for a minute too, I think the interesting idea that popped in as you were talking through that is this is going to make the opportunity for non-endemic advertising in the retail media space goes way up. If I'm a travel company today and I'm trying to figure out how to use Roundell's audience, I can easily target people that are buying sunscreen or whatever, and I can start to do all sorts of profiling and things like that. And if I can bring those data sets together super fast, it can be really effective. I think one of the other interesting things to pivot a little bit that came up when we were preparing for this is something that I'm sure everybody in the world has thought of this except me, which is cool. But we're talking about inter-company ways to use this. But there's also a lot of intra-company clean room examples as well. I kind of always envision this as different companies coming together, but there's a lot of ways you can use clean room technology to break down internal silos too, right?
Sure is. It really is. And I think it's one of those things that we don't probably talk enough about. I'll give you a quick example of a couple. I'd love to give a couple of examples, but one is I was talking to a friend of mine who works in financial services, and they were talking about an acquisition. This is years ago. They were talking about an acquisition. And this applies to really anybody. I just want to be clear, I'm using this example, but it really applies to anybody. And they were saying that in order for them to integrate the other data sets, it was going to be a multi-year process. And so right now what they were doing is everybody's working off of their own separate, kind of data sets, but they were doing VLOOKUPs and they were doing different cross-reference tables and things like that. And I thought to myself, well, gosh, you could really use data collaboration as a mechanism to get going in a matter of probably 6 weeks, as opposed to years, to at the very least being able to tie this data together and make it usable and actionable, right? And so it really got me thinking. And it's interesting because we have a QSR customer that literally was like, we own a couple of different QSRs. We don't have all the data consolidated. It's too much for us. IT owns this. Marketing wants to bring this data together and derive new insights. And what we did through collaboration was they identified, a new menu item for their lunch menu. That's not even truly a marketing use case. That's really more of a product, right? Use case in some cases. And I think that's exciting. I think the other piece of it is starting to use AI within clean rooms and how we've actually used that to drive effectiveness of marketing campaigns just by bringing together CPGs, different brands across the CPG's data. The other thing that was really interesting was thinking about different media properties and different media properties not having all of their data completely consolidated. We partnered with one where they use data collaboration to really identify some insights that allowed them to do a direct to streaming movie and really launch that during the pandemic. And it kind of changed their strategy by being able to bring all of this data together. And they're just kind of three different examples, right? But, if I just think about the amount of brands that live within a CPG, being able to like bring the different data points together to be able to better understand consumers as CPG customers are on this kind of first party data path, I think is incredibly powerful. And so I think we oftentimes don't talk about the value of how collaboration and clean rooms can really accelerate connecting internal data to be able to use that and really drive not just marketing campaigns, but it can drive supply chain efficiencies. It can drive product enhancement. It can drive all of these other enterprise value.
Well, it's interesting too, because and now the logic of this is pretty compelling. Because I don't think anybody listening to this podcast would have thought about LiveRamp as a potential solution for an internal data siloing problem. They all know the core LiveRamp proposition, which is acting as an identity and a connectivity solution for across the ecosystem. But this technology actually lets you kind of try to solve some of the problems that companies are having bringing their own data together. And this is only going to get more important. And, again, now anybody that had 34 minutes is the first time we mentioned AI, win a prize as well. But this is one of the things that I think is really interesting about the whole AI conversation that's going on at the moment is that there's no possible way there could be enough thinking going on about how to create the data feeds that AI work best off of, which are gigantic and integrated, so that the AI doesn't have to sort through different types of data to figure out what it is it's learning. Because if you make AI have to do that, it takes it geometrically longer to learn, because it's got to learn both the thing it's trying to learn and where it's coming from, and whether where it's coming from is reliable. So every time you give AI unmatched data, you're giving it 2 problems to solve instead of 1.
That's right.
So you give it 3 sets of unmatched data, you're giving it 8 problems.
3, yeah, exponentially more. Yeah.
So I think there's some really interesting upside for what you're trying to do here in an AI-powered world, and how you can serve up data that allows companies to then start to use AI more effectively, right?
Yeah, 100%. And I think about it like this. It's like, to your point, like once you're able to kind of collaborate and link the data in a privacy-centric way, in an approved way, I think AI comes into, like, I think about it like speed and new insights and things like that. And it's like, look, I think we could sit here and talk about AI, but the reality is like we're 1, scratching the surface, 2, also like broad definitions of AI around like, is this machine learning? Is this all, like there's so much that we could wrap into it.
Yeah, I mean, I always think of AI as a continuum from sort of like, Excel solver up to ChatGPT, right? I mean, like there's a continuum of things where a computer is understanding what it's doing. There's one where it can adapt what it's doing. Then there's one where it actually learns to do it faster. And then there's one where it generates things at the end of learning to do it faster, right? Like that's right. Yeah, it's not so
when I think about it in terms of like, I think it can do so much, but like, I really think about it right now in terms of how to like tie this into or integrate this into clean room capabilities is one, to your point, the fact that we're bringing all of this somewhat disconnected. And look, at the end of the day, let's also just be real about this. We talk about breaking down silos with data and the importance of that. There are more silos than ever with data. Let's just call that, right? Now what we can do through clean room capabilities, and by doing that, minimizing some of the data movement, but connecting these silos in a way that they are actionable. I think the power of AI for right now is the speed to be able to learn and test and make decisions. And I think that's incredibly powerful.
Well, I also think too, and this is a topic we've alluded to a couple of times here, but as we sort of come to the circling our closing remarks, I'd be curious for your, I didn't notice lawyer in your background, but certainly given you guys have sort of an interesting front row seat in the privacy world, right? So, and one of the things that occurred to me as we've been talking is, I come out of the research side of things years ago. So at Kantar, we were a big part of a lot of the GDPR conversation in Europe. And again, I'm no lawyer either, but the one thing I remember about GDPR is that if you're collecting data on someone, but you don't have a reason to collect it, you can get yourself in a whole load of trouble.
A lot of trouble.
The interesting thing is, of course, is that you may not know what your reason is for collecting data. You can't proactively collect data on people in Europe anymore. So that if you all of a sudden decide you've got a new use case for the information that you have, it's unlikely you're going to have the data on your own to be able to do that. And the other thing is that anybody who owns data in Europe is out of their mind. So like, unless you've got an army of lawyers that's, fairly large, being in the data ownership business in a GDPR market is crazy. So, because the fines for it are insane.
I think all of your listeners probably feel it on a regular basis, the complexity that it adds to just managing a global business. I also think, look, the reality is we can look to GDPR, we can look at what's happening at a state level here, and we have to be prepared for it here. And I think, that's like from a LiveRamp standpoint, that's what we're constantly looking at. We're constantly looking at what are the sources of data, right, that we leverage within our market, not that we leverage, but that we have access to in our marketplace. How do we insert privacy into the very core of our products so that when we talk about privacy by design, when we think about clean rooms, that these are built off of fundamental kind of rules around our privacy. And I think that's super critical as we go through this.
Yeah, that makes sense. Last sort of practical question. One of the things that people talk a lot about is sort of cross-screen measurement and stuff like that. And I think at this point now, if for anybody who's been listening to the 38 minutes we've been on so far, you'll probably understand a little bit about how your technology enables that. But what are some of the specific cross-screen applications that you've been looking at that you think are particularly?
Yeah. I think, look, the reality is outside of retail media networks and building retail media networks, cross-screen measurement has been the next use case that's really driving data collaboration today and the usage of clean rooms. And I would say they're pretty neck and neck because at the end of the day, every big brand wants to be able to measure their TV spend, wants to be able to get more insight into what's happening, not just across their TV partners, but also across their premium publishers and things like that. And so I think from a cross-screen measurement standpoint, like clean rooms clearly unlock that. And we see incredible excitement and partnership. Pinterest is a great example of being able to partner with, like, bringing brands together with Pinterest and other partners like that to be able to give them more insight into how media is performing based on the marketer data as an example, right? And so tying those two things together is incredibly exciting. We think about a lot of our television partners and how we're able to bring kind of the buy side and the marketer side over to them to give them better insights. And look, at the end of the day, it's a win-win because if our TV partners and our premium publishers are able to really show the value that they're bringing to the table, ultimately, this is it's the idea of like rising tide raises all boats. I can't remember the saying really well, but ultimately this level of transparency between the two sides within this privacy safe environment really is providing new opportunities for both. It's, TV partners and publishers have the ability to show new ways and new value points to brands and to marketers. And marketers are finding insights that they haven't had before on ways to optimize and leverage their data across this premium ecosystem, I'd call it.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is that you start to look at the possibility for sort of integrated path to purchase work in a much different way through the same basic idea, so which is cool. So, all right, my last question for you. So get your crystal ball out a little bit and say, I know we're about to go, 2024 is the year, right? Finally, after, Y2K is here now. So so we've got that going on. But if you look out 12 to 24 months, what do you think is most different about this landscape than we see today? What do you think companies are doing most?
Yeah. So obviously signal loss is going to be a big driver across all of this. So just putting that out there again, and this is really, it's signal loss, but it's also the idea of that there's different ways to transact and we're not as reliant on cookies. Pretty soon, we're not going to be reliant on cookies at all. But regardless of what happens there, signal loss is here, right? And we just talked about some of the GDPR components. We talked about how that's moving to the states. So there's going to be a new world that we have to operate in. I honestly think the one thing, if I was sitting there thinking about what is it that I need to do, we need to start thinking about building collaborative partnerships. We need to think about building out a collaborative ecosystem of partners across brands, across media publishers, across media partners, across, like literally it's brand to brand. It could be brand to a publisher. It could be two completely different brands that have nothing in common, but want to start collaborating to generate new consumer insights. So this idea of data, of like collaborative data sharing and connections through data collaboration is critical. The next thing I would say is find new partners. You got to go out there and test and find new partners. And the last is like lean in heavy to kind of the addressability side of it. It's really interesting to me to see, we have people that are testing kind of the addressable solutions in market, but I don't think that we have seen the full wave of marketers start to do it. And part of it's because everybody's looking to the very last minute that they can, right? There's so many workflows tied up to that. There's so much around that. But I would say like really leaning in to new addressable partners. I shared the Omni example earlier. That's going to be critical. And look, gone are the days where you can do it alone. They're gone.
Well, I think that's always been the challenge with addressable solutions is that people have struggled for whatever reason to figure out how to aggregate them easily and scale them. And I think that one of the virtues of technology like this is it allows aggregation to go way easier, which means scale is more visible and less heavy lifting, to use a phrase that you used, or that I'm paraphrasing that you used earlier around, reducing the lift around data movement, which is, I think, in the end, what you guys are kind of all about. So
that's it.
Cool.
That's it. We want to connect data, Brian. We want to connect data. We want to do it in a responsible, privacy compliant way. We want to make it easy. And at the end of the day, we want to really facilitate this interoperable global kind of connected ecosystem that really allows all of the different partners to come together in a much simplified way to drive value.
Outstanding. So, hey, and just a reminder to our audience that you can find all of our great content at the cpgguys.com. And if you think you or your company has some thought leadership to contribute, like this excellent conversation we've just had, drop us an email at contact@cpgguys.com. And maybe someday you can broadcast your message to our over 28,000 followers, to whom we are incredibly grateful. And please don't forget to drop us a rating at cpgguys.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our sister podcast, as I have a screamingly naked interest in you doing so. I'm on the Fast Forward side in particular, but as well as the CPG Scoop and the excellent CPG Scoop and the excellent FMCG Guys podcast, which covers this ecosystem over email. Hey, Danielle, thank you very much for your time. It was a great conversation. I learned a ton, so this was helpful.
Thank you, Brian. I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, so just a rough summary here as we wrap up. Look, I think we hit some really interesting points in here. I love the idea of collaborative targeting as sort of the foundational idea here, and how that idea itself is decades old, but the technology that enabled to do that really changes. Some of the narratives haven't changed, but the technology that supercharges it has. It's great. I love the idea around ease and speed to value, and really thinking about what the tech rules and the business rules are that enable that to come to life. I think the conversation we had around privacy, regulation, and stuff like that, I think most brands that aren't willing to pay millions of dollars a year or hundreds of millions of dollars a year of legal protection are going to own as little data as they possibly can to get their jobs done, and to use clean rooms as a privacy safe way to enable them to amplify that data where they need to, and to reduce the lift around data movement that allows that data partnership to work better and allows most data to live where it belongs, which is in companies that know how to professionally own it and manage it, and who honestly can pay for what will be an incredibly expensive compliance ecosystem. So, like everything else, regulation forces scale. It doesn't break it up. Going where the data is, the interoperability piece, I thought was a really big part of that. And your ability to partner across multiple cloud platforms, I think, is really cool. And that notion of the ability to reach someone going to be more valuable, I thought was great. And the other really interesting piece is not just externally, but internally, using the data to break down silos, which I think is really cool. And building collaborative partnerships, finding new partners, and leaning into addressability. That's cool. Well, listen, thank you to the audience. Thank you, Danielle, for your time. And everybody, have a great day.
Thanks, Brian.
The content in this podcast episode is provided for general informational purposes only. By listening to our episode, you understand that no information contained in this episode should be construed as advice from CPG Guys, LLC, or the individual author, hosts, or guests, nor is it intended to be a substitute for research on any subject matter. Reference to any specific product or entity does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by CPG Guys, LLC. The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. The views expressed by CPG Guys, LLC do not represent the views of their employers or the entity they represent. CPG Guys LLC expressly disclaims any and all liability or responsibility for any direct, indirect, incidental, special, consequential, or other damages arising out of any individual's use of, reference to, or inability to use this podcast or the information we present in this podcast.